Hi, this is the week 8 prompt response. No, wait, I lie. Week 9 prompt response for ECJ critical literacies. So old versus new literacy pedagogies. When I think of old literacies, I think of kids learning their ABCs at school and sitting in rows of desks. And I think of the brown box full of SRA cards that you used to have to do when you had nothing else to do because your teachers couldn't think of what else to do. I think of literacy rotation groups and team teaching and the stories my mother used to tell me of back in her heyday when she used to teach. She used to team teach with the girl in the next room, and no one really team teaches anymore because teachers have become so protective of their knowledge that they don't seem to team teach anymore. I think of a more tactile literacy, being taught how to hold my pen, obtaining my pen license, learning how to write on dotted thirds. Nobody teaches that in schools anymore. The emerging technologies have also seen emerging literacies that come from those technologies, like digital storyboarding and clay animation. And how to teach literacy has changed with these emerging literacies. And you don't just teach kids how you write an A anymore, holding pen on a chalkboard. We don't even have chalkboards in most schools anymore. You have whiteboards, and kids use Play-Doh or seashells and other things to learn to write the letter A. From the readings, what I've got about literacies is that students become not just knowledge consumers but also knowledge producers, and they take responsibility for their own literacy development. So if you've got a kid who doesn't understand that when you change a word that's a plural that ends with a Y, when you change a word that ends with a Y to a plural, you drop the Y and you add IES. So if you have a kid that doesn't understand that, you could get them to create a digital storyboard where, you have the word monkey come along and then the Y falls away and up pops IES, and you could have a little song or a little story. So the kid's taking responsibility for their learning, and they're also engaging with that literacy and obtaining the skills to decode that literacy as well. ICT indicates the necessity of understanding literacy as a social practice, and that literacies have become culturally situated through kids who can create websites and PowerPoints. And when I was out on teaching rounds, I was getting them to make a PowerPoint presentation, and they were more concerned with how the information came onto the screen and the effects and the transitions than the actual words that they were typing, and trying to get them to put the actual words in first and then worry about the animation was near to impossible. The other thing I've got from the readings is that a literate person is flexible. They sustain mastery, so they're able to adopt new literacy practices that emerge, and they're able to have some kind of idea of how to work these new literacies that emerge. They use traditional literacy practices like reading and writing and verbal conversation and face-to-face interaction to be able to decode the new literacies that are coming out. And they use new communication technologies, more so especially teachers who have the ability and the willingness to engage with new ICTs. You could say that those teachers are more literate than those who aren't willing to engage with computers and with ICT. And that there's also a hidden context. Like in schools there's the hidden curriculum. In literacies nowadays there's the hidden context, and that's the reading between the lines and over the lines and under the lines that Chris was talking about. And there was an episode of Coupling a while ago where Jeff was talking about captain subtext, and it was that idea of what you're really saying is this, and that's that idea of that hidden context within literacy, and that having to be able to read through and between and over and under the lines. The New Times critical literacies have changed in reading and writing from being only print-based sources to being multimodal texts, and it's allowing students to engage in digital multimedia and multimodal texts, so giving them access to the internet and to like mini movies that incorporate text and picture and word and that kind of thing, and audio. And websites are the new literacy of power. I mean, think about this prompt that we're doing now. We have to load it up onto YouTube, which is a website. There is so much power that YouTube holds. And it's the fact that it requires us to be able to critically engage with this multimodal text of a vodcast. We also require the appropriate coding skills and decoding skills to be able to deconstruct what we're seeing and be able to engage with the text. And that's something that Chris mentioned in his lecture, the idea that the codes are changing and the codes we need to be able to decode these multimodal texts are changing. We have the new times literacy teachers need to not necessarily be able to master all new technologies that come out, but need to have a vision for the future, the possibility of what could be, rather than have, I know everything about all the new multimedia that's come out and I can make all sorts of multimodal texts, but they have to be able to say, well, I wonder if, I wonder what could happen. And that new technologies don't, and the new texts don't necessarily replace the old ones, but they build on them. So you still require your basic literacy skills of reading and writing and speaking to be able to engage with the new critical literacies and the multimodal texts. Positives of the new literacy is that a text is changing, and the means to change that text and produce that text, and that sentence makes no sense, so I'll make sure I cut it out. What a text is changing, and so the means to produce that text is also changing. There has been engagement from the academic community. People have written articles. It's not something that's being shoved under the carpet, so to speak. And that pre-service teachers, like all of us, are being informed about it, and we don't get out into schools and think multimodal, what a multimodal. Negatives, in many cases, they can be informal literacy, so things like SMS texts and MSN stuff is all informal, like the WAZ, W-A-Z, that kind of stuff, so it becomes an informal literacy. And I don't believe we've gone far enough, well, definitely in Australia, to be able to assess new literacies in the same way we were able to assess the old ones. How is it different from my time? The big one is literacy in my time used to be called English. We didn't do literacy, we did English, and that was grammar and meta language and that kind of thing. And now it's almost much more inquiry based. Tell me what you know about this text. What can you decode from this text? It's much more getting kids to think about it and getting kids to give you the answers rather than telling them what's going on and that kind of thing. And literacy, being literate in my time meant that you could read and write and spell, and that was fine. And now it's becoming much more broader. The definition of what is a literate person is much more broader than it was when I was at school. As a teacher, how will I be positioned? Having been exposed to the idea of multimodal texts in pre-service training means that when I go into my classroom, I'm not going to be scared of the idea of using webcams or getting kids who aren't necessarily great writers to go and type it up and to use ICT to make multimodal texts to convey their point. That's fine. And I'm a technology native rather than my parents who are technology immigrants, and technology's come and they've kind of had to get onto it. I mean, internet in schools didn't happen until 1996. In 96 I was in grade 5. So I've had this stuff around since I was in grade 5. My parents were much, much older when this kind of stuff came into everyday use. The positives of new literacies is that the state government are providing teachers with the guides on how to tackle the new literacies that are emerging, and that it's better resourced. If you don't know how to create digital storyboards, you can go to the website and they'll give you step-by-step instructions on how to create a digital storyboard. And there are PDs you can go on all about multi-literacies and that kind of thing. And the technology and the hardware to be able to create them is becoming more readily available. Webcams, laptops, digital cameras, things like that. It's becoming more readily available, so you don't need to have a huge amount of money to be able to get the very base level stuff. And again, exposure as a pre-service teacher I think is really important. So that's my somewhat long, somewhat rambling response to the prompt, and I hope you've enjoyed it.